I'm here today with my very good friend, Mark Patterson, who is the co-founder of MatlinPatterson. And Mark, cannot thank you enough for having me over today. Really, really appreciate it. You've got one of the more unique backgrounds because you didn't come from this country. You were raised in Africa. Would love to hear a little bit about your life when you were a kid.
Well, growing up in South Africa, it's sort of a surreal background when you're a kid because you don't understand how privileged it is. But when you wake up at 16, 18, you realize you're living in a police state. And it's not financially as stable as it looks and all the rest of it. Anyway, so I went to an Afrikaans university, the best law school they had. It's Stellenbosch, the wine farming district, and learned very quickly I didn't want to stay in South Africa. I had an American mother from the Midwest, so I had an option. I didn't understand options back then, but I had an option that I wasn't going to allow to expire.
Okay.
I had an American passport. And so stumbled along and happened to get married by mistake at 22, and it's almost 40 years that we've been married now, Eleanor and myself, and we came to America one-way tickets at 25 years old and gave it a shot.
That's amazing. And so how did you decide to go into finance?
I looked around the law school, and there were some very, very bright minds there, and I was not one of them. And I figured I could do better in business than some of the great legal minds in the law school. So I moved over to a postgraduate economics degree, which shows you how little I knew about business. I thought that was business, and but it was better than completing the LLB side of the law degrees. And joined a bank, commercial bank. I liked that. That was too straightforward, and tried to get onto Wall Street because that's where I saw people could drive BMWs and own fancy watches. And my big aspiration was to be able to afford a decent watch. I still use the Timex, but never bought the Rolex. But
well, the great thing about the Timex, it keeps ticking.
And it wakes you up in the morning. It's got an alarm clock that the fancy watches don't have.
Without a doubt. Now, in terms of your first job on Wall Street, I know you joined Salomon Brothers at some point, yes. And you did night school, got your MBA at night at NYU. Did you find at that time that it was imperative to get an MBA? I
thought so before, and I was convinced afterwards. I was at Bankers Trust Company, which was acquired by Deutsche Bank in time. I worked twice at BT, but my first American job was 280 Park Avenue, a Bankers Trust commercial banking job, and they asked if I wanted an international assignment, which I leaped at, and they talked about Middle East, Africa. And I said, no, Indiana, Michigan, that's international for me. So I ended up being assigned to Michigan and covered the car companies and Whirlpool and Bendix, it doesn't exist anymore, Kmart, that doesn't exist anymore, etc. I had a wonderful time, but the learning slope was modest. The compensation was even more modest. And so I looked at friends who were able to survive well on Wall Street and looked more dynamic. It looked like it paid a little bit better, if not a lot better. And the one key that I didn't have to the door was the MBA. I repeatedly was told I needed to get the MBA. So I went to NYU Stern at night.
Okay.
A couple of kids, a tiny little mortgage I had at that time, a huge mortgage for me. And we put in 2.5 years as a family, and I got the MBA, and it was a miracle. And I got the job at Salomon.
There you go. And then at what point did you go into private equity?
Well, Salomon, I stumbled backwards, sideways into the junk bond business. It wasn't where I got hired, but I ended up being what they call the product manager for the junk division at the time, up against Milken, not a very easy place to play. And I liked that, the inefficiency of the markets. It was very exciting, and leverage finance wasn't even thought of. It was just high yield bonds at that time, and the loans were done by commercial banks and so on. And then I came back in 1990, I came back into Bankers Trust, into what was then, they invented it, leverage finance. They did the loans, the mezzanine, the junk bonds, put equity in funds, put equity in deals. And so I got to know all the big private equity, the middle and the small private equity firms and general partners. That was a lot of fun. And later at Credit Suisse, I served for 8 years on their private equity investment committee for their own activities in-house, the funds they ran. And then in 2002, David Matlin and I started this distressed for control private equity business, independent of Credit Suisse at that time. And that's how the firm was launched. It was independently spun out with a letter from John Mack and us to all the LPs, allowing them to walk away from the fund if they didn't want to stay with MatlinPatterson Global Opportunities. And 6 million out of 2.2 billion chose to walk. Everybody stayed.
Really? Got ya. In terms of, you guys have been around for a while, and you're doing all sorts of various investment strategies. Tell us a little bit about MatlinPatterson and what you guys are doing today.
Well, we started, as I said, as this distress for control, trying to take over. You don't always get to 80 or 90% control, but if you're the largest investor in NRG, you own 20%, and the next biggest guy owns 1%, you're sort of in charge. So we try to get to more than 50% where we can in private equity through the bonds, typically, distressed bonds. Over time, we wanted to lateralize or broaden the sort of shoulder shape of the firm from just a private equity franchise, which has raised $9 billion of PE capital. So in 2007, we started with a distressed hedge fund, long, short, but not for control. We're not trying to. It's not an activist fund. It's not a takeover fund, and that's done quite well, run by Mike Lipsky today. And over time, we've set up a thing called MPAM. MatlinPatterson Asset Management, that holds our hedge fund activities, like the Front Point team that came out of Morgan Stanley in the CMBS, RMBS mortgage field. They're completely top tier outperformers in their sector. They've been together 10 years. So a great story, and they've continued that, thank goodness, here with us and are growing strongly. Two, we've got a high-grade junk bond and muni trading group out of KeyBank in Cleveland that continues to do a great job performing in their sector. Obviously, the distress group I just mentioned, they're also top 15%, top 10% performer in their sector. And then a CLO team from BSAM. They brought over $1 billion plus of their own assets, not our assets, so we never claimed those assets. But they had a core cash flow to survive, and we went out and we've now done over $1.3 billion of CLOs with them.
Good, good, good. Throughout your career, you've done a gazillion deals. Are there any deals that stand out to you as ones that really impacted your life?
Skitty, impacting your life. There's a long list of deals, but certainly three leap to the front of mind. Taking Jim McCann's 1-800-Flowers public and doing it as a .com company. That was one of the 4 deals that got attempted to get done in the IPO market right before the .com boom bust. And that was the only one of 4 that got done for Jim McCann. And we've been close friends ever since. Another transformative deal for sure was a German family, pharmaceutical family, the Strungman family, and they had created a company called Eon Labs, E-O-N. And we took it public at Credit Suisse First Boston. I was the guy sort of supervising that for them as the lead underwriter. And when we spun off as our private equity firm, they invited me to go on the board. That had nothing to do with MatlinPatterson, obviously. And the company did very well, and the stock price did very well. And eventually I suggested they might think about taking some money off the table. They went way further than that. They sold the entire company to Novartis for over $8 billion. For the public shareholders, for themselves, including their private company in Germany as well. So that was a great transaction. They've been loyal to our firm, and they've been good friends of mine for a long, long time. And finally, by far, the most transformative deal in my life was being invited by the Eon Labs outside general counsel to consider sitting on a board of an insurance company I knew nothing about, founded by AIG, by Goldman Sachs private equity, by Swiss Re and Chubb. There was a little company called Allied World that today is $12 billion in assets and had a little tiny $2 billion balance sheet back then. And I served on their board for about 7 years and helped transform how they look at investing. And they took on more risk in the alternative space. And one day decided to make minority investments in a couple of diversified credit firms. I immediately left the board, obviously, to give our little firm a chance to be considered by them, MPAM. And luckily, 6-9 months later, they actually did invest in MPAM and are one of our largest investors and most supportive LPs, and they own a tiny minority stake.
In terms of some of the deals that went south, were there some real learning lessons?
Yeah, I think buying automotive parts companies back in 2002 to 4, where you think that GM and Ford and Chrysler are going to be fair to you as a couple of $100 million or $1 billion or $1.5 billion supplier, you're an idiot. They're going to bully you. They're going to crush you. Their compassion is not what led them to be giant companies. And anybody weak got crushed. So we got hurt in 04 or so, 02, 03, buying in, and by 04, 05, we'd let this company go. That didn't work out well. Small investment, but that was a lesson. We bought in 08, 09, we bought into Thornburg Mortgage, which didn't work out well, and that's the high net worth jumbo prime mortgage business that Fannie, Freddie, Ginnie do not securitize. The amount borrowed is way in excess of the government limits. And so you need a securitized, active securitized Wall Street market for mortgages to be able to move that collateral off your originated collateral off your balance sheet. And Thornburg Mortgage and the rest of the world looked at a zero for 2009. Not one single deal was of securitized whole loan prime jumbo mortgages was done that year. So, so their conveyor belt cranked to a halt, and we were liquidating and paying back our debt to the banks, 5 banks, and the banks in mark-to-market rules under Rule 157 chickened out. They just got too nervous to go back to their credit committees and show another mark-to-market loss, though our delinquencies and defaults were minuscule in the portfolio. And they foreclosed on the company. So we lost everything. And so it teaches you about the power of frightened people. It teaches you about one of the great LBO and distress for buyout, for control investing. One of the great mismatches you can't live with is an asset liability maturity mismatch. And we had shorter term maturities on our liabilities than the assets did that we were holding in that company. And we were, in effect, reliant on the patience and goodwill of the banks. And if you recall, in 2008, 2009, everybody's hair was on fire. No one had any patience. And we knew some very, very senior people at those banks and talked to them. It made no difference.